If you drive a car in Florida, changes could be on the way that affect you. That's coming up this morning. Good morning, live from Studio 5. This is First Coast Connect on 89.9. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Melissa Ross, and a busy program coming up. Later in the hour, Tech Tuesday explores Apple's latest announcement. It's one the company says will revolutionize yet another industry. This time, it's education. We'll also speak to author and historian Wayne Wood about his new project. It's one celebrating the life and career of civic giant Fred Schultz. And a renowned specialist in addiction and recovery visits town with a unique spin on the classic 12-step program. Find out what that's all about. All of that ahead this morning. But first this hour, major changes to the state's no-fault insurance law could be coming out of the current state legislative session in Tallahassee. This as the alarm is sounded about the growing number of Florida drivers on the roads with no insurance at all. What does it all mean for you, the consumer and automobile driver? Well, there's a lot going on when it comes to your safety on Florida's highways and byways. Here to discuss it all this morning, we welcome attorney Wayne Hogan, president of the Terrell Hogan firm in Jacksonville. Wayne, great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Also in Studio 5 with us this morning, David Miller, one of the owners of Brightway Insurance. Good morning to you, David.
Good morning, Melissa.
And our question to callers, what are your questions about your auto insurance and proposed legislation that would bring changes to PIP, as it's called, or Personal Injury Protection Insurance? 549-2937 to join the conversation, 549-2937. Send your emails to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Tweets to @MelissaInJax. Wayne Hogan, let's begin with you. A House committee in Tallahassee has advanced major changes to Florida's no-fault insurance law. They're approving a measure that would require policies to cover only emergency care and services rendered within 3 days of a wreck. This is a major change for the state's insurance law. What's your immediate take on this legislation?
Well, naturally, there is a number of proposals that are there in the legislature to deal with the question of whether there are too many expenditures that are occurring under PIP, or personal injury protection as it's called. But on the Senate side, I know that Senator Joe Negron has a proposal which is focused on seeing that clinics that are providing services under the personal injury protection part of an insurance policy are properly regulated, that they are properly demonstrating the number of visits that have been made, seeing that they are run by physicians or documented and regulated chiropractors. So those kinds of things are intended to eliminate, as best as can be done, the fraud that has gotten into the system over the years on the expenditure side. Perhaps we should begin with some basics about this, though. When someone comes into an office, a lawyer's office, and they've been in an accident, and they say, well, I had full coverage. Well, the truth of the matter is, when you ask them, you think you had full coverage. Well, did you have liability insurance? Did you have uninsured motorist coverage insurance? Did you do something to protect yourself if you got involved with an accident with someone who had no liability coverage at all? Florida is one of only 2 states. 48 states have required bodily injury liability coverage. Florida doesn't have that. It adopted this no-fault PIP system years and years ago. And so people who are driving cars out there in Florida today need to know that there are thousands, a quarter of the people out there driving without liability insurance. So if somebody causes an accident that hurts them, they need to know that they should have provided for themselves uninsured motorist coverage.
David Miller, let's get your view on this. As Wayne Hogan pointed out, thousands of drivers out there aren't covered. It poses a hazard to those who are if they don't have uninsured motorist insurance. What about this PIP legislation as well? Let me ask you, do you think these changes will be good for the consumer?
Well, I think at this point it's still early, and we don't know what and if any change will actually happen in the session. These things typically go back and forth throughout the session. We're a few weeks in, and so ultimately, I think what's important is that people understand why it's important these changes come about. You've got a situation here in Florida where the costs and the claims that insurance companies are paying has gone through the roof. It's up over 170% since 2008 alone, and obviously that impacts real people's premiums. And what's happening is there are just tremendous abuses in the system in terms of the regulation of these clinics. There are now clinics, and we're fortunate that in North Florida we don't have a tremendous number of them, but in South and on the west coast of Florida and even up through Orlando and heading this way are clinics that are designed to just take advantage of PIP coverage. And what's happening, and these are places that focus on pain treatment, they focus on physical therapy, even massage therapy. And so this is all in the last few years that this new cottage industry has popped up. And a lot of the focus in both the House and the Senate is to regulate these businesses. We've got people who are very entrepreneurial in this state, and it puts the regulators and the legislature at a disadvantage when they need to try to pull this all in and deal with what's best for over the consumers of the state. We all pay way too much for our premiums, and in fact, some sources have said 25% of the premiums that you pay as a motorist go for fraud. And so anything we can do to reduce that fraud number is ultimately going to lower the cost that we all pay for PIP coverage and our insurance in general.
And if you're just joining the program as we discuss uninsured motorist coverage in Florida and proposed legislation regarding PIP insurance in the state, our question to callers, what are your concerns, your questions about your insurance? Let us know. We'll get to the phones in just a moment at 549-2937. Wayne Hogan, skeptics of this proposed PIP legislation say they don't believe it would that there's no data to support the supposition that it would bring costs down for people buying auto insurance. So you've had a chance to review it a little bit. What do you think?
I think that it is the case that there has been a change that has developed over time, and there has been and is abuse that's in the system in terms of the providing of these services. And as David says, largely that is in a different part of the state than here. But it needs to be dealt with and headed off if at all possible from that standpoint. And regulatory reforms can have some meaningful effect in accomplishing that. I don't have any doubt that it plays into the rate situation, but we know all you have to do is see ads on television to know that insurance companies are claiming I can get you the lowest rate, the next one can get you the lowest rate, et cetera, et cetera. So they're having a price competition that causes people to wonder about insurance itself, and we have to be careful about that. Insurance is a service. It should be there to provide protection for people. The insurance company takes premiums, and they should stand behind the policy that they've provided. That's one of the reasons that I and a number of other lawyers around the state feel that it's important for Florida to have a system in place that requires responsibility on the part of the driver who causes the accident. Bodily injury liability insurance should be a part of Florida's law, and it hasn't been for years and years and years. It really needs to be.
David.
Yeah, you're right on target, Wayne. That's one of the things that as consumers we all need to take heed of. It's something, just because the state says you do not need to get bodily injury insurance to get a tag doesn't mean that you don't need the coverage, and you absolutely do. And that's one of the things that we all need to focus on. But to say that it's questionable whether or not there's a need for this type of reform is also short-sighted. Right now, insurance companies pay about $1.15 for every dollar they take in, and that's true specifically on the auto side. Yes, the advertising would have you believe that everyone's lowering rates, but the reality is, and if you look at filings in Tallahassee, auto rates are continuing to go up. The amount that people are paying specifically for their personal injury protection is also going up. It's going up much more so in the south part of the state, but we're seeing it here as well. In fact, an average consumer who is in Dade County, which is in Miami, can pay as much as $3,500 a year for their PIP coverage. The coverage amount is only $10,000 a year. So to give you an idea of the degree that fraud is coming into it and that how it's affecting rates, when you look at that, less than every 3 years, you'd essentially have paid for the coverage. And that's to give people a sense of how big of a problem it is. Mm-hmm. I think that makes it clear.
And the proposed bill that's being looked at, it would limit coverage requirements to things like ambulance costs, hospital treatment, but only within 72 hours of the accident. So the idea is to root out fraudulent claims. Let's go to the phones. Your questions about your insurance and others around the state who might not have it. 549-2937. Jim on the west side. Jim, good morning.
Good morning. In order to put this in context, I'd like to, if they could tell me some statistics on the number of drivers that are driving without insurance that are, A, either can't get it because they got a DUI, or they're illegal alien and can't get it, or B, people just can't afford it, the price has gone up and so they're choosing not to have it. If they have that information, that'd be helpful. And also, as an aside, last time we had the state had big debates on insurance reform and workers' comp and auto. There was a big debate, and all the insurance companies said there'd be a drop in rates, and the lawyers said no, there wouldn't. After the reform, I did see in my company about a 40% drop in rates.
All right, Jim, thanks for calling. A caller from the road there. Wayne Hogan, he wants to know, what are the statistics when it comes to the uninsured, and how much of it could be driven by the economy?
Well, part of the problem is there aren't the best statistics around, but it is known that about 25%, going on 25% of Floridians are uninsured. They are driving out there without the required coverage. Now, there's an even, if you look at it from the standpoint of lack of bodily injury insurance, liability coverage, that's an even higher percentage, it seems. Mm-hmm. I understand the caller's concern about whether workers' compensation rates have gone down the way they should, but in the field of workers' compensation, they made gigantic changes which took away substantial rights to coverage by workers, and nevertheless, the rates didn't go down the way that they were promised. It's hard to pick out a particular part of it, but I can tell you that at least in workers' compensation, it doesn't have to do with attorney's fees because that basically has been gutted.
Yeah, I would agree with that. As far as being able to get coverage is available. The question is, can people afford it? And that is a real question. The thing that we all need to do as leaders is address the drivers that are causing costs to go up above what they should be. And the more that we're able to put a grip on these kinds of abuses, we'll ultimately get coverage at a price that people can afford it. There's a wide difference in rates, and it does vary quite a bit from carrier to carrier, and availability is there in the market for just about everyone who is driving and wants to get the right coverage.
And many drivers out there think they are fully covered, and they're not, right?
They're not. And the best bargain out there in terms of what a person can do to protect their family is to have uninsured motorist coverage insurance. It's also called underinsured motorist coverage insurance because sometimes a person would have, a driver that causes an accident would have liability insurance, but it would be a low limit. If a person has the ability to purchase and pay the premium for uninsured motorist coverage, they should do it. That's a matter of looking out for them, their family, their kids, in a situation where somebody else causes an accident, and it's not that expensive. You can obtain this uninsured motorist coverage for not a very high premium, and the truth of the matter is you can get large limits and still not be paying a lot of money. And so if a person has the ability to pay for any insurance, they need to make sure that they also have one liability insurance, but also uninsured motorist coverage to protect themselves.
And if you're just joining the program, as lawmakers look at major changes to the state's no-fault auto insurance law, what are your insurance questions? Let's get back to the phones. 549-2937. Paul in Orange Park. Hi, Paul. Thanks for holding. You're on the air.
Good morning. Excellent topic, and one that I think needs to be addressed. I believe that people who cause accidents and have no insurance or a ridiculously small amount of insurance should be liable and be able to be sued for their lack of appropriate responsible behavior. I have complete insurance on my vehicles and am covered for any situation. The price of insurance can be brought down if everyone has to participate in purchasing it, and the ridiculous awards in the courts, that exorbitant amounts given out to people that are disproportionate to what their actual losses were. Those two things.
Paul, thanks for your call. Thank you, Paul.
Insurance is a matter of spreading risk. And so Paul is right in the sense that the more people who have coverage, and especially if they had liability coverage, because the rule ought to be you're responsible for the wrong you do. And you ought to pay the person that you hurt under those circumstances, and that's why to have that kind of coverage. So spreading the risk is what makes the insurance system, which we all have to have, work.
Yeah, the reality is the cost for getting bodily injury liability and uninsured motorist does pale in comparison. The money you save by going from a $250 to a $500 deductible on your car can pay for tens of thousands of dollars of this very important coverage that we're talking about.
Frank in McClenny. Hi, Frank. Oh, we lost Frank in McClenny. But give us a call back if you can, Frank. Lots of people phoning in. We'll get to your calls in just a second as our phone screener gets you all on the line. 549-2937. No surprise that we're getting lots of calls. This is a topic that affects virtually all of us. It does.
People are out there on the roadways. You see it every day. You hear about it. If you listen to the morning news, the traffic reports right here on WJCT, there's the information about the tie-ups and the problems and the reasons for the tie-ups. So we're all in this together, and spreading the risk makes a big difference, and we should all be required to have that kind of insurance.
And if you could put Sharon on hold, please. We'll get Sharon's call on the air. If we could get Sharon, please. Thank you. Sharon, go ahead. Thanks for calling. Sharon, hi, good morning.
Hi.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Yes, I have two comments. One, I've been a fully insured motorist for 40 years, paying, reasonable premiums. I did have an uninsured motorist claim and had to take the action to court for the insurance company to pay. It is not an easy experience, and I do think that when you've gone to court, you've had a jury award. It's not something necessarily for people to say people are not entitled to. They don't know the injuries or the extent when they see these awards in the newspaper or what have you. But additionally, I carry full coverage collision, and I have found it interesting since when you buy a new car, it costs more to have it repaired. But through the years, as the car ages, if you keep it for a long time, your insurance doesn't go down, and you're going to get less for the car if it is damaged. So I just find that an interesting premium issue.
Sharon, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Some of the times when you go to buy a new car versus the old car, the new car can actually cost less than the old car, whether it has safety devices. Now the newer cars with the dual airbags and in many cases 10 airbags, anti-lock brakes, anti-theft devices, all those things affect the premiums. And so, there are a lot of components that go into the comprehensive and collision coverage and what affects the rate. The amount the cars are stolen, the cost to repair them, and loss history, all those things affect those cars. So I would certainly suggest when you're going to buy a car, contact your agent, get an idea of what the cost of insurance is going to be for that new car. Most agents will be glad to provide that.
Randy at the Beaches. Randy, good morning to you. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, I thought there were minimum insurance requirements that we had that included bodily injury and all that kind of stuff for coverage that people that you hit. I got hit on my motorcycle in 2009, and the lady that hit me, all she had was $10,000 worth of property damage, which fortunately paid for my motorcycle, but it didn't. Nothing paid anything for my medical bills or anything like that. I ended up with like $90,000 worth of medical bills.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I ended up having to go on my health insurance, and we're self-insured, so that comes out of my pocket.
Randy, your story is goes to the heart of this issue.
Well, and Randy raises a classic example of where she didn't have liability insurance, and I don't know whether Randy had uninsured motorist coverage or not, but it certainly would have helped in that situation. Florida only has the requirement that $10,000 personal injury protection coverage and the $10,000 property damage. That's not what it ought to be, in my view, and in the view of a lot of people. There ought to be a required liability insurance.
The whole idea of personal injury protection when it was first instituted in 1971 was that we take a lot of these cases out of the court system and we deal with them in an expeditious way and make it so people can be made whole quickly. The reality is that $10,000 today is a lot different than $10,000 was in 1971, and the fact that we're one of the very few states that don't even have a requirement to have that bodily injury liability.
And why is that? Why don't we have that requirement?
It was thought that it was the world's greatest reform when it was put in back in the 70s, and there was a trend to come into this no-fault situation. Back then, it was $1,000 that they provided. It has obviously proved itself to be subject to abuse, proved itself to have a variety of problems over time. For now, they're trying to mend it rather than end it, and it could well be that it would be a good idea to continue personal injury protection coverage, but also to require bodily injury bodily injury liability. Can I touch one thing that was mentioned by Sharon? And that is, she said she had uninsured motorist coverage, but in the end she had to go to court to get the insurance company to do what they had promised that they would do in terms of the coverage. There is a field of law within insurance called bad faith, in which insurance companies are, in many instances, found. You can look at the encyclopedia that lawyers use called Florida Jurisprudence, 35 pages worth of a discussion of the law of insurance company bad faith in failing to handle claims properly. That is a big issue in the state of Florida that has to be dealt with on an ongoing basis. Hundreds of Florida cases dealing with the topic of insurance company bad faith. So the adjectives and the processes of insurance companies in treating their insureds fairly is also something that has to be looked at on a constant basis. It's not just on the expenses related to the claimant. It's also whether the insurance companies properly handle the claim when it comes in.
But that's not being discussed in this current measure.
No, it's not.
Per se.
No, and in the scheme of things, I think if you would look at it as a whole, you would think by watching TV and seeing all the ads from different trial attorneys on TV that you would think, well, boy, 50% of the time insurance companies aren't paying what they're obligated to pay, and the reality is that 99.9% of the time these cases never get that far. They're paid properly. People are very satisfied with the way the claims are handled, and quite frankly, the insurance companies are very well aware that it's in their best interest to pay a claim that's legitimate and pay it as quickly as they possibly can. The last thing they want to do is take a claim that needs to be paid and should be paid and get into a situation where someone's watching TV and decides, I'm going to call one of these attorney referral services, or I'm going to do these things and have the claim artificially increased and ultimately hurt all of our results and increase all of our premiums.
Just as in any other situation, though, people need to have advice. And
Absolutely.
It's fair for them, it is proper for people to get appropriate advice so that they know what they're dealing with when they're dealing with a professional adjuster.
And I understand where you both stand on that. But let's get back to the phones. Lots of calls about this issue. Jim in Jacksonville. Hi, Jim. Good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead, Jim.
It was stated that 25% of premiums go to fraudulent fraud, and I was curious to know if how much of the premiums go to commissions to the agent and to the insurance companies apart from what they pay for damage.
Thanks for that question, Jim.
Well, from the standpoint of the insurance company, there are tremendous costs associated with all the different types of operations that they run. Obviously, for insurance companies, they find it to be less expensive to deal through agents than to many times do it themselves. There really isn't a cost difference between dealing with agents or the companies that decide to spend similar amounts of money on advertising and that sort of thing. People need to realize that those things aren't free, and we all pay a cost for that.
But his question about the percentage, what's the answer there?
And I don't have specific percentages, but certainly far less than the amount that is currently going to fraud.
It's important to understand, though, what insurance is. An insurance company receives the premiums. They invest those premiums. Insurance companies are not in the business of making money based on taking in premiums and paying out claims. They actually use the money, invest it in a number of investments, and that's where they make their money. And that doesn't, we really run the risk that sometimes when the investment markets are down, rates go up that they charge premium payers. So insurance companies and regulators know this. They have to pay attention to the cycles of the market, because you run the risk that insurance companies will abuse ratepayers to make up for losses that they've had in the investment market.
And let's try to fit in one more call. Almost out of time with this discussion, but let's go to Daniel at the Beaches. Daniel, good morning.
Good morning, Melissa. I've been unlucky enough in the last couple of years to be in 3 quote-unquote no-fault accidents where 3 other people hit me.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, me too. But my question is, I recently checked with another insurance company about changing insurance and was told because of these 3 no-fault accidents where somebody else hit me that I wasn't insurable, so somehow it's come on my record, and I was wondering how this proposed legislation might impact that.
Would that affect you? Look, that's a good question. I'm sorry to hear your bad news there.
Yeah,
David.
Yeah, actually, what may be the case is the insurance agent you went to didn't have a market for you. Maybe they only represented one company, and that company couldn't insure you. But the reality is there are many markets that are available, and that's one of the factors that obviously affect the rate. So my suggestion to you would be to go to someone who has access to many different options, because there are options available, and there are good low-cost options available.
And then as we close, Wayne Hogan, while this legislation is looked at, the overriding point for those who are out there and they have some insurance, it is important to check to make sure that they have uninsured motorist coverage.
Absolutely right. That's a matter of looking out for, number one, looking out for yourself, protecting your family by having adequate uninsured motorist coverage insurance.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us. This legislation is pending in Tallahassee. We'll continue to follow it here on 89.9. Thanks for your participation. Attorney Wayne Hogan, president of the Terrell Hogan firm in Jacksonville, and David Miller, one of the owners of Brightway Insurance. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa.
Well, later in the hour, Tech Tuesday checks in on Apple's latest announcement. We'll also speak with historian Wayne Wood about his new book, celebrating the life of a Jacksonville giant, the late Fred Schultz. But up next, the vaunted 12-step program gets a new twist. We'll speak to a renowned specialist in addiction and recovery as he visits Jacksonville. You're listening to First Coast Connect on 89.9.